The old map called it Black Pine Ridge, but the locals just called it the Quiet Place. That's where Alara and her husband Ben decided to buy a dilapidated remote cabin for a weekend retreat. It was surrounded by an unnervingly dense forest, where the pine needles silenced your footsteps and the sun barely pierced the canopy. The cabin itself was dark, smelling perpetually of dust and old, wet wood. While cleaning the cluttered attic on their first night, Ben discovered a small, locked metal box tucked beneath a loose floorboard. "Look at this," he whispered, wiping away the grime. They struggled to pry it open, finally succeeding with a rusty chisel. Inside, there was only one item: a heavy, antique photograph in a silver frame. It was a portrait of a woman, perhaps from the 1920s. Her face was pale and severe, framed by dark hair pulled tight. But it wasn't her stern expression that unsettled them. It was her eyes. They were completely black, unnaturally large, and seemed to hold an impossible depth. "She looks empty," Ilara murmured, instinctively turning the frame over. Engraved on the silver back, in script so fine it was almost invisible, was a single instruction: "Do not keep her inside the house." They laughed it off. "Superstitious nonsense," Ben said, placing the eerie photo on a high shelf in the living room. "Probably just some old family eccentricity." That night, Ilara was woken by a sound. It wasn't loud, just a faint, rhythmic scratching coming from the living room. She nudged Ben, but he was deep asleep. She crept out to investigate. The scratching stopped the moment she reached the doorway. The room was bathed in cold moonlight, streaming through the single large window. Then she saw it. The antique photo was no longer on the shelf. It was sitting on the polished wooden floor, leaning against the base of the wall, exactly where she was looking. "She must have knocked it down earlier," Ilara rationalized, her heart thumping. She picked up the chilling portrait, noticing the wood where it had rested now had 3 parallel score marks, faint but visible, like tiny claw marks. She carried the photo to the back porch and placed it on an old, rickety table outside. Remembering the inscription, "There," she whispered to the empty forest, "you're outside." The next morning, the scratching sound was back, louder this time. Ben finally heard it too. It was coming from the thin wall behind their headboard. They jumped out of bed. On the wall, near the corner, the wallpaper was torn, and there, etched into the plaster underneath, were the 3 distinct, deep scratch marks, perfectly mirroring the ones Ilara had seen on the living room floor. But the real terror struck when they rushed to the porch. The old, heavy photograph was gone from the table. They searched every corner of the porch, the yard, and the surrounding pines. It was gone. "It must have been the wind," Ben insisted. Though the air was dead calm, they went back inside, shaken. As they stood in the silent kitchen, they suddenly felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Slowly, Ilara turned to face the reflection in the dark glass of the microwave door. Behind her, standing in the shadowy hallway, was a tall, thin figure. It was the woman from the photograph. Her face was pale white, and her eyes were not just black. They were like 2 pits of infinite darkness. And in her long, bony hand, she held the silver frame. Before either of them could scream, The woman raised her hand and pressed the empty frame, firmly against her own face. The faint, rhythmic scratching sound started again. But this time, it was coming from inside the walls, and the sound was slowly, steadily moving toward them. They ran, scrambling for the front door, fleeing the house and the forest without looking back. They never returned, but every few months, Alara gets a strange, untraceable text message, always late at night. It's just a single image. It's a picture of the forest, outside the cabin, taken from inside the house, looking out through the front window. And somewhere in the dark image, if you look close enough, you can just make out the reflection of 3 parallel score marks etched into the glass.